any researchers, those who want to present their research, they can join in World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, we are trying to develop a better ecosystem in Asia Pacific. So we are launching few interesting events in Asia Pacific based on academic research and consulting. Those who want to join in our ecosystem, you directly can join. And I'm hope that the speakers, those who have a lot of experience from their industry, they can support all of our small startup and small medium enterprise in Asia Pacific. So I just want to start from Professor David Smith. How do you want to analyze about today's topic? Our today's topic is engineering for humanity.
Well, to me, engineering for humanity is interesting because it implies at the face value that most engineering is not for humanity. And so you have to begin to put the pieces together. What's interesting to me is there are probably 60 colleges and universities that have degree plans in engineering for humanity. And so to me, it's began to move out of just a discussion point into more the mainstream of how do we take our engineering processes, how do we take our scientific processes, and as opposed to using them to make things to return just revenue, how do we take those and put them against some social good? How do we take them and put them in a place where the prime motivation is not the traditional ones you've seen many times in the past of let's try and make it better, faster, cheaper. And how do we put it in the context of what is good for society, what is good for humanity? The interesting thing is I looked at some of the degree plans is there's more social science in this than there is pure engineering in some of the degree plans. And so I think that is part of where we're seeing with the emphasis on climate change. I think it's where we're seeing the emphasis on sustainability, on the whole movement of how can I take what we're doing and shift from things that are bad for society and to things that are good for society. You know, the growth of the EVs, the electric vehicles, is a place where you see examples in engineering for humanity, where that is one of the key examples they began to use. Is let's set a new paradigm in place that's better for the environment, better for society. Even though I do see times I get kicks out of it, like the EV power battery charger that's driven off of a big diesel generator. That if you calculate the amount of diesel used to charge up the EV, it comes out to 0.4 miles per gallon of diesel use. So you begin to see even things like that because they're not looking at the whole system. They're looking at just parts of it. As I was beginning to look more across engineering for humanity in the degree plans, to me, that's one of the things that we as a group, and particularly in countries where they're beginning to set up more programs for engineering for humanity, that we have to look at is take more of the systems approach, take more of the approach to see, even though this looks good, what are the impacts, the first order and the second order impacts of what we're doing? Because oftentimes those orders of impacts make a difference in what we're trying to do with this. But engineering is fundamental. And what we're trying to do with society and humanity is fundamental too. And pushing the two of them together, I think, creates a great basis for the thought process that has to be done as we begin to look at new innovation, new elements there. The other thought I had on engineering for humanity is as I put on my entrepreneur hat, and as I put on my hat, as I talk with incubators, accelerators, and innovation centers, this is a great filter to begin to use as you're going through your list of companies to say, I have this idea, I have this spark. What can I do with it? And some of the concepts behind engineering for humanity are a great part to join that checklist and to use. And as I evaluate companies and companies that we're looking at doing M&A with, I think this might be one of the things we add to our due diligence list, which already has almost 300 items on it. So what's one more? But it really is a great filter to look to see, how do we give back? How do we engineer to give back? And that's kind of the thoughts I had as I was looking through and prepping a little bit for today.
Thank you. Professor Rob, how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Sure. When I think about designing for humanity, I think of things like human factors engineering, which of course has been in our design process for some time. And I also think of a book called Technically Wrong that came out a couple of years back, where it talked about the problem with designing for people and the fact that we've got largely male engineers designing for both men and women. And the end result is we have an awful lot of products that work all right for guys, don't work very well for women. That's been part of the problem and promise of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence promised to try to go in and take the data available and then help develop and make decisions based on that information. But when we first started with it, mostly with regard to image recognition, the test sets were largely old white guys, and so you ended up with fairly good accuracy with old white guys. You had really bad accuracy with women of color. In fact, a common mistake the system made, which really didn't play well, was connecting people of color to animals, and so a lot of the early efforts were complete disasters as a result, and rightly so. The minorities were pretty upset. Designing for people does require that you really capture people. It requires a focus on how people think, how people do things. And one of the existing problems in the industry is the fact that we don't really promote heavily cross skills. In other words, developing a skill in human engineering, in how humans are engineered. In other words, medical skill, and then blending that with a technical engineering skill on how to build products. Doctors that are engineers are pretty few and far between. Yet as we move from wearing technology, from holding technology to wearing technology to the next field, which will be embedding technology in our bodies versus prosthetics to deal with physical shortcomings, and eventually to expand our capabilities and enhance our senses, that ability to bridge between the technical and the medical is going to be ever more critical. A lot of the efforts right now that are particularly interesting are the efforts to try to create a direct interface between the human brain and computers, of something that could be much faster, something you could query almost automatically without any focused thought. The issue is that a lot of the technologies that are being developed are not organic in and of themselves. They're wire meshes. They're things that you would have to be surgically implanted into your brain. And if you think about an upgrade cycle and the fact that this stuff tends to go obsolete on a semi-annual or annual basis, having to go in and surgically replace that stuff is probably not going to be viable. Plus, you're over your life, your physical dimensions change, and metal is not known for being able to grow, shrink, or adjust to anything unless you do it through an engineering exercise. And so, as we go forward, this idea of engineering for humanity is going to go through some very serious, has some fairly significant challenges, because our next phase is really to try to better integrate people and machines more closely together. But you can't do that unless you really understand both of the systems. And we are still pretty light, at least on the engineering side, in terms of having people that are expert on the human body and can make what I would call measured decisions and how to integrate the two things. So expectation is we're still probably about 20 years off from true integration to true human machine integration. And as we get there, we're going to have some rather embarrassing mistakes as a result.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Adrian. Professor Adrian, how do you want to analyze today's topic, engineering for humanity?
Yes, I think I agree with the previous speaker that engineering has been primarily a male domain, and so I think that that has to change, and it is changing. I'm actually reading a very long, very huge book, biography of Nikola Tesla, and he actually wrote in article. I think he wrote it for some publication when he was, in the, I think in the 20s, and he wrote that he predicted that women will become more powerful than men in the future, because at that time his friend, who was the I can't remember the first name, but the daughter of JP Morgan, his daughter, was good friends with Nikola Tesla, and she was a very big person who promoted the voting rights for women. At that time, women couldn't vote. So Nikola Tesla, which is probably the greatest engineer, at least electrical engineer, greatest electrical engineer, I think, of all time, he predicted women would become more powerful than men in the future. And I think that future is actually arriving. Maybe we haven't got there yet, but as a professor, and I've been teaching maybe 25 years, I think I've seen a significant change in the cohort of a typical electronics class. Before it maybe would be 5% female, and we probably haven't got to 50%, but it's maybe 40%. And in the future, I think it'll be the majority will be female. So I think Nikola Tesla's prediction will be correct, and so I agree with the previous speaker. Actually, very disappointing. Everyone here is a man, so this is not a good example. It's not a good example at all. But I predict that, when we have these lectures in maybe 10 years' time, hopefully it'll be all women and no men, because right now it's all men and no women, right? So that's very unfair. And the question is, what will men do in the future? Because the women will do all the work. All the actual business work outside the home, and maybe the men will do the housework in the future. And the second thing I want to say, totally different topic, about engineering. I think we saw this year. It was not in the electrical engineering domain, but we saw this last year, the incredible progress of bioengineering. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. I actually don't really understand the details, but basically they are engineered vaccines. It's not like the old days where you have the whatever the disease was, and you kind of modify it. This one was actually manufactured DNA inserted into some cell. So it's not a modified virus or dead virus injected into people. So this has to be one of the most exciting times ever to be a biotechnology bioengineer, because literally the work saved millions of lives. So with the coronavirus pandemic, so I think it's never been a more exciting time to be at least a bioengineer. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adrian, for bringing women leadership. Actually, one of my PhD in glass ceiling factors. I do research in Malaysian University. In COVID-19 situation, actually glass ceiling is increasing. So I don't know that how women actually getting the best positions in academia as well as in corporation. According to UN United Nations Development Index, like even Malaysian position is 60. So HDI index actually declining in Malaysia. Number one position actually Norway. I think many country, even country like USA, Canada, Australia, because of glass ceiling, many women cannot achieve the top level in the corporations. It's happening everywhere. It's happening everywhere. But hope with modern science, engineering, and technology, women leaders can contribute a lot, and they can get their position. From World Talent Economy Forum, we always invite a lot of people. Maybe women has to face corporation as well as homework and everything. So every time they cannot contribute. But Madam Durga Das, sometimes she join in World Talent Economy Forum. But we also encourage more women leaders to join in World Talent Economy Forum. What actually Professor Adrian's indicate, this is very, very important, because if we cannot represent 50% of our communities, it's mean we have to improve a lot. Even though we improve many things, still the glass ceiling factors we need to improve. So this is very, very important topic, and an important thing Professor Adrian bringing in the show. Professor Donalds, how do you want to analyze to this topic?
Well, I've been listening to the previous speakers with great interest. I want to point out like what is engineering, or just kind of say what I think engineering is. Basically, if you look up technology in the dictionary, the technology is taking scientific advances and converting them into something that we can use. So that's what it is. And who does that? Well, that's what engineers do. They take our advances in science, and then they find some sort of way of converting it into something that we use. And we make advances in science in all kinds of areas. We make, as Professor Adrian and Rob both pointed out, there's been incredible advances in biotechnology. So as Adrian just pointed out, the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines use messenger RNA, which is something that your cell produces to manufacture proteins. And so what they did is they created some messenger RNA that wasn't made by your own cell nucleus, and they inserted that messenger RNA into your cells, and then the natural process of your cells started using it to create a protein, which basically was like a key into a door that locked the ability for the virus to hook onto your cells. It basically, and blocked it. And it's working so well that it's even seems to be working pretty well with the all the variants. So it's an amazing accomplishment, and we're going to go miles with it, a long way with that. I want to really emphasize that we don't just have scientific breakthroughs in things that are physical, but we also have scientific breakthroughs in our understanding of people and human relations and humans. So like the group I work with in the University of Oulu is called Persuasive Technology. And what we're interested in is how, when people interact with technology, how it affects them. And some of the engineering outcomes from it that we're having some success with and hope to keep expanding have to do with health behaviors. So for instance, I have this Fitbit here, and it keeps track of how many miles I've walked or how many steps I've taken. And it inspires me. Like the other week, I walked to the point where I was 58 miles, and I said to myself, well, I really want to hit 60 miles. So I went out and took a 2-mile walk just so I could hit 60 miles. And I mean, that, and I look at it, and if I have a day where it's only, you know, 4,000 steps or something, I feel guilty, and I go out and I walk more to make sure that I can, you know, know at the end of the week I'm going to have this high score. It's like a game. And so that's an example of technology affecting our behaviors. When we jump up a level and we start looking at how humans really make decisions and how humans basically, we have this idea that people have minds that have free will, that our minds, and then we make decisions, and because of the decisions we make, it determines our life path. And I think that the example of women is a really good one with that, because a woman can decide whatever she wants, but if the social roles that she's able to inhabit or desire are blocked to her, she can't do it. I mean, it doesn't matter how wonderful she is. I mean, we know that some of the great things in the space program and things like that were actually done by women of color in the background who never got any praise for it until recently, where we started to make movies and try and show that these, you know, unbelievably brilliant. There's and this is another example of using technology. There's a professor at Stanford named Claude Steele, and what he does is he did these incredible experiments where he would get a group of women and a group of men matched as much as he possibly could, and give them a test and say, this is a math test. And the women would do worse than the men. And then he'd give another group that was matched as much as he possibly could to the original group, and he'd give them the same exact test, but he'd tell them, this is a puzzle that we're developing, and we'd like you to take this puzzle so that we can evaluate how good the puzzle is. And the women killed the men, and which is just, that allows us to start seeing how our own biases affect us as a person. So that means that the person's social role, like women aren't supposed to be good at math, it's not feminine, blah, blah, blah. So they believe that story about themselves, and it actually affects the way they work. He did the same thing with people, with blacks and whites, and the same exact thing happened. Blacks did every bit as well. And overall, then, what we find is men and women are basically a lot closer than we've imagined. I mean, so I think the question about whether men or women, if you go to countries like Finland, where I've lived, I pointed this out before, their entire government, the prime minister and all of the cabinet are women under 35, except one is a woman over 35. And so we can develop a society where those things are possible. And I think that using technology, like one of the technologies I use is just statistics. And people just, you know, get all upset about statistics and say, oh, you know, people lie with it and blah, blah, blah. But it's the only way that we can compare two populations. And you just have to be really honest and careful about what it is that you're saying. But we can tell two populations are different. That's the only way we can really tell. And so, and then another one is social network analysis, where we're able to look at the connections between people and see how groups of people associate with each other. And like the work I'm doing is trying to show how those associations create culture, or culture is mapped to those networks, dense networks of people. So there's a dense network here, there's a dense network here. Like, I don't talk to Trump supporters, and I just don't talk to them. And so it's a completely different social network that, and they have different cultures. And all of those are technologies that are being used to try and understand people and society and politics and all those kinds of things that I think will make a difference in the long run. It is making a difference. We're able to create persuasive technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Adam is our new friend in World Talent Economy Forum. So how do you want to analyze today's topic? And if you introduce yourself with our speakers, and unmute, please.
Is that okay? Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you to Sharif for inviting me on here, and it's a pleasure to be here today. My name's Adam, and I am I do lots of different things really. I'm a writer, but I have pretty much all of my life I've been like a futurism enthusiast and a transhumanism enthusiast. So this is a quite interesting topic for me, of course. I agree with Professor Adrian about what you said about this being a very exciting time to be alive. It's an enviable time to be alive, and I think there'll be lots of people throughout history, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, be quite jealous of us living in this this juncture, really, this incredible crossroads where we could go in lots of directions. And the feedback loop of human behavior leading to technological developments, and then those technological developments have a feedback effect on humans again. It forms a very interesting feedback loop. So I think I got into futurism and transhumanism sometime in my early teens, and it was Ray Kurzweil I got into. So his ideas have kind of like coloured my perception of a little bit of the future. It still feels like we're on this near the curve, really, when the singularity is imminent. It might take a bit longer than you originally predicted. So speaking of bias, really, even now, sometimes when I think of the word engineering, or someone says the word engineering, I immediately start thinking of Isambard Kingdom Brunel and steamships and giant chains and Stevenson locomotive. So, and then in this part of human history, of course, technology is getting smaller, and I think the word engineering can be transferred over to emerging technologies where things are getting smaller. And so I think a few of the ethical challenges that we face could probably be considered a kind of a problem, an engineering problem to be, well, engineering could help solve some of the ethical issues that we're facing, like meat. So, of course, recently, lab-grown meat has started to lead into the public consciousness a little bit, and it's quite interesting that people mentioned, women, and it might not happen just yet, but maybe in our lifetimes we'll see construction and widespread use of things like artificial wombs, which is controversial, but these kinds of technologies, once they're a bit more accepted, could probably, free people from these kinds of responsibilities that have kept people from fulfilling their full potential because of traditional gender roles and things like that. So perhaps a future matriarchy may be inevitable and perhaps necessary as well. So just excuse me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. James. How do you want to analyze today's topic?
Thank you for inviting me, Sharif. Wonderful topic. great to hear. Let's sit back and listen to the panelists. I've been taking notes. You know, it seems to me that we're talking a little bit about apples and oranges here, with the apples being engineering and its application for humanity, and also about the exclusion of women from participating in that. And you know, so I'll talk a little bit about the oranges and then get back to the apples. Because I think I'd highly recommend reading the book Schoolgirls by Peggy Orenstein. She's a reporter from the San Francisco Bay Area, and she wrote about how we systemically reward boys for STEM or STEAM in school, while systemically discourage girls. And this systemic prejudice towards males participating in these isn't just in the school systems. You know, it's in society as well. It's encouraged in governments. It's encouraged in religion. There's a patriarchal society. It's set up, and that they discourage. And I'll talk about the chess aspect of this, because Susan Polgar was a tremendous chess talent growing up in Hungary, and the Federation told her that it was unnatural for girls to play with boys. So of course she couldn't get better unless she played with boys. And so she eventually became the first woman to ever earn, by merit-based, the Grandmaster title. But she had problems not only in her home federation of Hungary, but in the World Federation as well, because they raised the ratings of every woman except her by 100 points to compensate, because Susan was playing against men and the others were only playing against themselves. So this is really weird, but this is actually the facts that women face on a day-to-day basis. And it's systemic. And you know, what I would say on this subject is, don't focus on the differences between us, focus on the similarities. And so I don't care what country you're from, I don't care what language you speak, I don't care what your role is in reproducing the species. You know, these things are not as important. The similarities that we have as Homo sapiens on this planet Earth are what's important to focus on. Now, the differences, enjoy them, celebrate them, they're the spice of life, but don't concentrate on them. They aren't the most important things. When we talk about humanity, it's talking about everyone. So don't focus on men, don't focus on women, don't focus on the color of your skin, don't focus on your religious faith. You know, think about in terms of humanity. So now what about engineering and humanity? Let's go back to the apples. Okay, the first engineer I knew was Choo Choo Charlie. He was an engineer on a train. And I thought, man, that's cool. Engineer on the train, that implied leadership, that implied competence, that implied, you know, all these aspects of that I looked up to, that, you know, an engineer was cool. In my mind, in my childish way of thinking, Charlie was great. And so, you know, there's an aspect of engineering that just appealed to me from the start. But it turns out my hand-eye coordination is really bad, and I tend to break things rather than make things. And, you know, so that wasn't my path. But, you know, I still admired them. But, you know, then we got into this term thinking of, you know, specialists. We wanted specialists to put themselves into a special field and get really good at engineering X. And now we're finding that we really need more of an interdisciplinary approach to this. These people have to be more balanced. And the question I have is, what do we want the engineers to produce? What do we want to make? Because when we started, it was, what did we need? And then we made that. And then it became, what did we want? What did we desire? And then they made that. And then it became, what can we sell? And then they made that. So we've got to change our thinking. We have to have a post-capitalist kind of mindset when we think about these things. What do we want? What do we need? These are two different things. What do we need, and how do we provide that? Then you're talking about humanity, meeting the needs of humanity. So engineering towards those things. What do we need? We need pure drinking water. We need food. So what can you make that can purify water? Now that is engineering applied to humanity. Purified water, wow. Plant-based foods, manufacturing them instead of raising animals to eat. This is where I think we start to think about engineering and humanity as one. And we start to think, and yeah, the bioengineering field, man, they produce marvels. They're not miracles, but they are marvels, what they're doing today. It's just mind-boggling when you think about it. So it is an exciting time, no question about it. But who's making these decisions? That's the other thing you have to ask yourself. Who's telling us what we need, what we want, and what we just simply desire? And who's going about selling them? Who's going about controlling the means of production of them? And these are also questions. So the governmental aspects of it, the policy aspects of it, the industrial aspects of it, and the wisdom that we sometimes lack when we do this. What are we making and why? Why aren't we asking ourselves these questions? We need pure water. Why aren't we focused on that? Why isn't government funding that instead of fossil fuels? Why aren't we talking about plant-based meat substitutions? Why aren't we investing in those companies rather than the fossil fuel industry companies? When I buy shares of stock, why isn't my focus on that? So we have to ask ourselves fundamental questions. And it's not so much about scarcity, which in a capitalistic world, it's about scarcity. If it's scarce, I could charge more for it. But what's about abundance? What about a lot of drinkable water? What about a lot of food, so that you don't have scarcity and people are allowed to live not lives of quiet desperation, but lives of quiet dignity? And isn't that what humanity is all about? And are we engineering for that? Are we focused on doing that? I would say some are, and an awful lot are not. So we need to change our focus. And how do we do that? So I'd like to hear other thoughts about that as well. So thanks again, Sharif. Wonderful show. Great comments so far that I've heard.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be on the panel today. So what I would like to say today is the importance of science and technology in engineering, and the interconnection between them. I would like to discuss about those aspects for the topic of today, engineering for humanity. So I would like to mention that it's also important for a good engineer to be interdisciplinary, and also to be qualified in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to be innovative and to be creative. So the map that I have in mind is, first we have science. Using science, we can make discoveries. But after that, we need engineering to come up with the invention of the different technologies. And then we need the technologies for the different applications in our daily life. So, for example, we have chemistry, but we have chemical engineering. So the chemical engineer will use the discoveries that are made in chemistry, and then he will come up with technologies using those discoveries. And a technology that we can find coming from chemical engineering, we can give one example, is nanotechnology. So we can see the different applications of nanotechnology. If we take the example of biology, so in biology we can make discoveries, but then in bioengineering we have to use those discoveries and come up with inventions, with technologies, and we can use biotechnology and have many applications. So one of the fields that is getting developed also is the quantum field. So in the 20th century, when we talk about quantum, it was mostly about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, but then these days we have quantum computing, quantum engineering, which is helping to come up with new technologies that can help. Now we can use the quantum technologies for many applications in cybersecurity and many other applications. So that's the aspect that I wanted to add today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Kumar, how are you today and how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I mean, it's a pleasure to share the panel with everybody. I'm delighted to hear everyone, and it's quite exciting and fascinating for me. And I would like to address it's all about natural selection. I mean, I love nature. And to understand the nature, we have science. As Mr. Manuel saying, to understand the nature, to understand, to be interact with them, we need science in order to develop, or if I want to modify, we need engineering. As Mr. James was saying, the technology and the engineering, how it serves humanity. I used to dream in my childhood whether bacteria can clean water, or the water can be converted into fuel, or all the buildings can be developed using all the greeneries which is available around us. So I was quite fascinated about all these ideas, and I started exploring all this and doing one by one. When I heard Mr. David said, I mean, like people are keen about technology, but they don't care about the consequences. Like, say, if I build a e-vehicle, I need a lot of energy, but that energy again, I'm going to take it from the fossil fuel or somewhere or the other. I mean, how do I support that? And that's what I mean. I started questioning. So my practice is like, whenever I have a problem in front, start to question. So that's how I mean. I see that natural selection itself will give you a better solution for each and every problem. I would say, I mean, we are all a product of nature. So I don't see any difference like men and or women. So I would say, I mean, we are all product of nature. From there, I mean, we are trying to understand the science and give what the humanity or the entire world needs. So in that aspects, I mean, I would say we are raising a lot of questions and understanding the science and giving the product. But um, in that process, a lot of people, I mean, as Mr. James was saying, as a capitalistic mind, we tend to manipulate things because we understand the science. The engineering part will have the idea of manipulating things. So to give the product what we want. But instead of manipulating, if we try to solve the problem as it is by understanding the engineering and science, that would be great. So recently, we've been working on water for the past 12 years in terms of the natural process. I mean, especially in water. So I understand water pretty much, and we try to develop the base as a water, right from toilet cleaner to drinking water to even I mean, eliminate bacteria as a sanitizer. So with a simple product that H2O serves in multiple ways because of the change in pH. So imagine the rest of the product, what nature gives to us. So I would say, I mean, I'm quite thrilled to talk about those aspects in this panel today. So that's my view.
Thank you. Thank you. This is very interesting. So, Professor David Smith, like different aspect actually coming from different people, especially everybody except one point that yes, we need to be more concentrate on humanity. So even right now, actually very challenging situation both in healthcare system as well as in economics. What area we can focus for developing some sustainable ecosystem, because like more food security, healthcare security, water, like pure drinking waters, many things still actually we can understand that we are not prepared for this kind of pandemic. What is your advice? What kind of strategy we can implement?
The examples you gave each almost deserve their own session to go through the details on those. You know, just to take a cross cut on them. one of the challenges we have with the elements you mentioned there is how do we provide adequate cybersecurity? Because we're seeing more and more that the elements of healthcare, the elements of the power infrastructure, the elements of the water infrastructure, food chain infrastructure are all being targeted by cyber attacks. And the disruptions there can really dramatically affect the country, the citizens as we go forward there. So a national policy of putting in place adequate cybersecurity as you're doing the engineering, as you're putting the pieces together, is very important. One of the challenges I see is I'm on a couple of advisory boards at universities, and in the engineering program, they really don't address the cybersecurity side. You know, they address the physical engineering, the chemical engineering, but not the impact by these other things. So again, that's part of the system that tends to be ignored. And we have to begin to look at that as we do the engineering for humanity to get there. The other point in there is that oftentimes the engineering becomes disjointed. And what do I really mean by that? Many of the domains you mentioned tend to become siloed. And the people working within that silo don't often reach horizontally into the other ones to understand. And what we have found is there might be something done on a power grid, and working on the power grid to enhance it, do things, has equal applicability in an agricultural chain, has equal applicability as you look at the water systems and its distribution. And somehow we need to work to knock some of those silos down, and how to get the collaboration to a point that is usable in those areas. A good example of that, slightly perpendicular, is when 9/11 happened in the United States. If you looked across all the intelligence agencies and across the military agencies, there was a lot of information on that. But because they worked in silos, none of that information came together in a useful, meaningful way. Same thing as you talk about the elements you mentioned, Sharif, is that there's a lot of good work being done in those areas, but it's not communicated to the other ones next to it. And that is one of the things that government has a fantastic role in helping to facilitate that type of cross communications. I do some roadmaps that are called wicked problem roadmaps. And one of the things we do with our working groups is we have a set of people whose whole job is to go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to identify cross-cutting issues. The elements you talked about in the infrastructure put in those all have cross-cutting information. And somehow that cross-cutting information needs to have a way to be communicated to the others, to both leverage, to be involved with, and to be important with. Many times in corporate, strategic planning fails because they look at it in the department and the issue, and not the cross ones where they have impact. And we use in corporate planning methods to deal with that. We need to do the same as we look at the humanity level. And I really think you can put this in place. You can work the elements to do that, where we combine our best practices and move it to an ecosystem level, a government level, a commercial level, and yes, an academic level, because in engineering for humanity, it plays at all those points. So that's kind of where I think my initial answer is to your question, Sharif.
Sharif may be frozen. I think he would go to Rob next.
Yeah, he's back now. It looks he just jumped.
Yeah, but he's still not moving. Well, so anyway, I'll pick up. this concept of engineering for humanity is changing quite a bit at the moment. Probably one of the biggest revolutions that we've ever seen in the technology market. Up to now, you built a technology and then somebody had to learn how to use it. If we look at the personal computer, it didn't learn our language; we learned its. And for much of our history working with computers and technology, that's the way it's been. The machines didn't learn you learned it. The concept of which was subservient was kind of upside down, and mostly due to our own limitations. A lot of the advancement right now that's going on with artificial intelligence is to change that dynamic. It creates systems that learn about you, understand you, not only hear your words, but understand the meaning behind them. The latest advancement in Windows 11, for instance, is advancement in voice to text, something I've been waiting for 2 decades, where it actually gets the meaning behind what it is you're saying, so it can insert punctuation. Up to now, if you're doing voice to text, you could speak and it might understand the words, but it didn't understand the meaning of the words. And so the mistakes the system made largely were due to the fact that you probably weren't pronouncing something consistently. With AI, it understands the meaning that you're behind the words, and so it can better interpret what it was you meant to say, and not only understand and interpret your what you're saying more accurately, but adjust to make the sentence structure so that it conveys your meaning more accurately as well. This idea of actually linking the artificial intelligence to the human, not to replace the human, but to enhance the human, now kind of spreads is spreading as a counterpoint to artificial intelligence being used as human replacement. And the promise, of course, is to eventually blend the two elements together, and so that we become better than we once were. But as I say, there are two camps. There's that other camp that says that's probably not the viable way to go. Use artificial intelligence to replace people, and then have people go into some type of well, I'll call it terminal leisure. But you wouldn't really have to work anymore. Artificial intelligence handles your life. I think that'll probably be the end of the race if we go that particular direction. But that just showcases we do have the two directions, and both directions remain viable. When you are engineering for people, the underlying concept is you have to put the people up center and first. One of the issues we have right now in engineering for people is we use a concept called personas. Personas are when you create artificial people and you design against those artificial people. So for instance, you might create an artificial person that's a concept that's a housewife, that's her husband works, has 3 kids, and has this particular set of needs. The downside to personas is generally those personas don't exist in reality. They are constructs. They are what an engineer someplace believes a person is, but has never gone back to find if there are any of those actual people exist. And that explains quite an awful lot of projects that are based around personas bring out products that nobody wants to buy. They've developed a product for a person that doesn't exist in the world. A funny side story, when I was marketing at IBM, I had somebody walk into my office saying I need to develop a marketing program for a product. And I asked the guy, I said, so who's the customer? And he looked back at me and says, well, I don't know the customer's name. I said, no, what I mean is who's going to buy this product? What makes them tick? What would make them want this thing? Because it wasn't a cheap product, and we spent $20 million developing it. He couldn't answer the question, and I refused to develop a marketing plan. So one of my peers decided to pick it up and run with it. They ran a $20,000 study to discover there were no customers out there that wanted the product. We'd spent $20 million to build a product that a $20,000 study would have showcased we absolutely didn't need. By the way, it's a common mistake. Another funny story, just a side story, was at one point they were supposed to run a monorail between the LA airport and Disneyland. They spent $9 million determining the monorail wasn't going to be viable financially. The monorail's total cost to build was $2.5 million. They could have built the damn monorail and been ahead millions of dollars and had the same outcome. And I'm willing to bet you if it had been built, people would have used it. So this concept of really kind of understanding the customer is going through a lot of change, just as products are going through a lot of change. So they learn to understand you. And the future is going to undoubtedly be an artificial intelligence interface that over time optimizes its relationship with you, and whether you want to deal with it with text, voice, direct mental connection, it's all coming. It'll adjust for your needs as opposed to you adjusting for it, and it's a sea change, and really it's undoubtedly going to define the next couple decades of development. So an amazing amount of advancement going on here.
Thank you, Professor Donald.
I want to kind of continue with what I was talking about and then add one other factor to it. And I think people really need to understand the idea of social roles. And we live in a world of people. And within the world of people, we inhabit roles. So for an instance, if you're a carpenter, you don't get to decide what carpenters do. I mean, that's not up to you. That's a role that's unconsciously maintained within our society. What is a company? Can you see a company? Can you smell it? No. A company is a complicated set of rules that we share. And so when people start talking about meaning and things like that, I think that they're missing something, which is basically words mean different things every time they're used. You can't look up meaning in the dictionary. Meaning doesn't exist in the dictionary. Meaning is the actions that we take based on what we're using. Language is there for us to be able to interact with each other so that we can extend our problem-solving ability. And imagine that you created this perfectly intelligent thing, and what would it do? What would its role be? Where would it fit in with the interaction? How would it develop meaning from the interaction with people? You look at data, and even data in Star Trek had a clear, defined role. And so he could be able to talk to and interact with everybody, and they knew what data was doing. And data knew what they were doing, and data wasn't a real thing. It was a guy with makeup on. It wasn't a robot. So right now, when we talk about understanding language, what's really going on is that it's like a two-step process. And the first step is, and I got into Amazon and talked to them about this once, and I looked at it all across the board. And it's a two-step process. They take the sounds that you make, and they take those sounds, they convert them to text, then they take the text, and then they look it up in a kind of dictionary called an ontology. And what it is, it's a dictionary where they basically have kind of a hierarchical structure that's linked together. So if you want a pizza, then they have vegetarian pizzas and health pizzas and all these kinds of things, and they're all linked together. So if somebody asks for a pizza, then it's linked to the ingredients of the pizza and the knowledge that it's a pizza and things like that. And that's getting better. But the way that these work is purely statistical. They ask the question, what's the next word? And what's the statistical probability of what the next word, what words can statistically follow some word? And so they're not anything like human language. And we have been doing artificial intelligence bottom up. And it turns out that that's not the way the brain works. The brain works as basically a prediction machine. So our brain is basically, we live in a hallucination. Our brain basically hallucinates what's around us and then modifies the hallucination based on sensory data. It's a totally different than the way we've been doing it. And it could actually create great advances in artificial intelligence now that we know that. But the idea of being able to predict all of the things that are around us it's unbelievably far away. And But I want to emphasize the way that technology is being used as it relates to what we're talking about in women. In sociology, what they did forever was that they divide people into groups of average first people. So there was the urban black female, and there was the rural white man, and so on like that. And they look at these groups as averages. So every person in the group was basically the same. They're homogeneous. And with Harrison White did a study where he looked at the way that people advanced in the hierarchy of organizations. And the Methodist Church, for instance, had kept detailed records of every single solitary person that had ever worked for them and been promoted. So they got used data sets like that. And they couldn't figure out why people were advancing. They thought their original theory was because they were better than everyone. It was merit that was causing them to advance. But actually, it turned out that it was random, and it basically had to do with who was closest to the a slot that gets filled. Like, you can't become a vice president unless in a fixed organization. You can add more vice presidents, but generally you can't become a vice president until you leave. And the general managers that were closest to that vice president were the ones who were most likely to get promoted. It didn't have anything to do with ability. And that's a scary thing. But he showed that in an empirical way. And that's the bugaboo, is that we can talk about society and we can talk about intelligence and we can talk about all of these things. But what our brains are wired in a way that we see patterns, that we see patterns, we explain things, and our brain comes up with these explanations, and they may have no relationship to what's actually going on. So how is it that we can start measuring the things that are going on around us so that we can actually make decisions based on actual real evidence? And we're very far from that. I mean, it's a wonderful area that we're making some advances in. And then the other part that I wanted to say is that technology is, we're looking at the big stuff, and I'll go back to what others have said. One of the biggest problems in the developing world is that women don't have sanitary pads. And so a lot of girls drop out of school because of that. And that's just so taken for granted around that you just go down to the 7-Eleven or whatever and buy them here. I mean, it's nothing. They're everywhere. And a group of people figured out a way to make sanitary pads that were completely biodegradable out of, I forget, some very common material, and incredibly cheaply. And that's technology too. And as people said, having clean water, having good sanitation, all those kinds of things are technologies that we have but they're incredibly expensive. And so people in the developing world need cheaper ways of doing it. And people are coming up with it. I'm just going to close with an example, which was, I know some people that created lights, solar-powered lights. And you'd think, wow, that's nothing. But the number of people that don't have electricity, don't have lights is incredible. So a kid comes home at night, he can't study because there's no lights. And so these solar-powered lights are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper you have to get them very, very inexpensive for people in the developing world to be able to buy them. But simple things like that are technologies that can make a huge, huge difference in the world, even though they're not as sexy as artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Professor Adrian.
Yes. There's so many different aspects. What part would you like me to comment on?
Yes, basically, like you were discussing one of the important point on women leaderships and how they can contribute, because we want more women in this show. So even though like previously we arranged many interesting things on gender issues. What's your opinion when we do work in scientific area, how women can contribute more and how we can develop a sustainable ecosystem?
Well, I think it will happen naturally. I mean, if you just look at the increase of women participation in every aspect of life and business and culture, it's definitely an upward trend. And I was just commenting that it's kind of funny, actually, that we're all a group of men talking about women. So we should somehow change that. But this will happen naturally. Like I said, I think in 10 years' time, probably will be opposite. It'll be all women on this show discussing the various aspects. So I'd like to say something else. I think for many of these shows, I've mentioned that the coronavirus pandemic has changed many aspects of our lives and accelerated some trends that we saw before. One of them was we talked about education and how everyone suddenly jumped to online schooling. And in a very similar trend, because of the various lockdowns we had starting last year, many people were working from home, and actually, this was another silver lining on the coronavirus pandemic cloud, was that working from home was actually very beneficial for women because they could more easily balance the different tasks they have to do, like working and looking after the family, cooking, etc. And also because the men were at home as well, then people realized that men can also do all those things, like look after the kids and help with the schooling of the kids and cooking or whatever. So many. I was reading an article in New York Times that many, especially younger females, let's say under 35, want to keep that flexibility even after the coronavirus pandemic, because it is beneficial for them, and the big disadvantage before was that normally when women have kids and whatever, they find it very difficult to juggle home life and work life. But when everyone is at home and you're working from home, it's much easier to juggle it than when you're going to the office and you're maybe commuting 1 or 2 hours a day in total, or even more. So suddenly, because of the coronavirus, we learned that yes, we can work from home, and so a lot of the younger women want to keep this flexibility. Some maybe want to work a few days a week at home, or a few, or even full time. They want to continue to be able to work from home all the time. Maybe they just go to the office for 1 or 2 times a month for some important, company-wide meetings or something, So women want to keep that flexibility, especially younger women, and so the coronavirus accelerated what was probably a trend in working online. There was people doing it before the pandemic, but it accelerated it, probably a million times, because suddenly we all were in the house in lockdown. So this could be very, very positive. The coronavirus, the pandemic, could be very, very positive for women's participation, and the women now are demanding the same flexibility even after the pandemic, and I think most companies will allow it. Actually, it's interesting to see that big range. So I think Facebook said you can permanently work at home for the rest of your life. Maybe it was Google, but then you had the opposite extreme where I think JP Morgan or one of those big banks in New York said everyone must come back to the office by some deadline. I think it was July or August, right? So we still don't know what's going to happen, but it may depend on the industry, and of course many jobs cannot be done online. And interestingly, it is the more well-off that can work online. The person who works as a supermarket, worker, of course, can't do that virtually, right? They have to be at the supermarket and checking out the goods. And it's interesting that we have a kind of a social divide where more well-off people can work from home and less well-off people cannot. And this is another issue, because what you saw in USA was that Black and Hispanic people had a higher chance to catch coronavirus and a higher chance of death from coronavirus, and that's probably because they're the ones forced to be working in the shops as what we now call frontline workers, and the more well-off people could sit at home working on their computers. But anyway, that's the main thing I wanted to say is that the coronavirus pandemic maybe has accelerated a million times a trend of working from home that can be very beneficial for women in the future. So we may see a great change in the way women can continue their careers, even if they have kids or even if they have other family issues. They can continue their careers because now we do not think it is anything, let's say, deficient to work from home as we might have thought before the coronavirus pandemic. Sharif, you're muted.
Sharif, you're muted.
Mr. Kumar, can you hear me?
Yeah,
can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Yes. So already Professor Adrian discussed about the like women contribution in corporations and how it will grow. Even your organizations, I know that Madam Durga Das and they are playing a very good roles. But we need to learn more about the Asian, especially South Asian, Indian present situations. India also has many challenging role. You are actually engineering organization, those who solving water related problem. What's going on inside, especially in the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah. So during this pandemic, is it me or someone else?
Yes, Mr. Kumar.
Yeah. So during this pandemic, and especially in the second wave, we hit really badly, and we try to address the problems of basic sanitation as well as the water issues, especially for the people who are taking care, the hospitals and the public service police and the other areas. So we try to address that problem, and we are giving the best out from the company. But still, I would say, we come up with a solution where if we give this idea of making it DIY to a lot of people, they can themselves start making that and then serving themselves during this pandemic. Because in remote places, we are not able to deliver, or people are afraid of taking parcels. So we started teaching them how to integrate and how to do this stuff. And eventually we found that making it as a platform and a community to serve or to do themselves becomes very powerful, because one Mr. Donald was saying, I mean, the sanitation, the sanitary pads, when he was discussing, I mean, we try to teach them how to do their own sanitary pads using the natural material, natural selected products. And that was very helpful for a lot of people in southern part of India. And this time especially, this spreads due to contagious, I mean, like through air and contact. So we thought, I mean, if they do everything by themselves, they can rely on their sanitation and their safety. So that gives a lot of boost in this period. And of course, I mean, in terms of water, what we try to understand is, when we dig deeper into water, we try to get different knowledge. Say, example, when we took water from the industry as well as from the sea, we live close to the coastal region. We try to get minerals so that we can pack it and we can sell it to all this different industry. And in that process, we are now going beyond to identify a lithium compound in a very, very low concentration level in the seawater. It's like less than 2 ppm. But it was a good initiation what the COVID has given us, because we try to go back to our lab and do much more effective research and give that solution to them. So that way, I mean, this COVID has helped us in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsid.
Thank you, Sharif. Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation and discussion. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what Rob was saying. I'm sorry he's left, but about the development of artificial intelligence. And you can look at it as very optimistic. It's going to anticipate what you want, what your desires are, what you need, and adapt to you. And there's another way, and if you're a little bit on the evil side, as some of us are, you think about what can that be used to do that's not beneficial to humanity, and you think about, well, who's controlling the artificial intelligence, and besides that, who has access to it? Is it just the white males who own land? That's how our country started. The United States started. Just those are the only people allowed to vote. So what if it's something like that? It excludes women, excludes people of color, excludes people that can't own land. So who has access to that kind of intelligence, and who's controlling it? And does this artificial intelligence want me to all of a sudden develop a craving for Doritos? And who's selling Doritos? And is the person selling Doritos in charge of the artificial intelligence? And all of a sudden I have an urge to eat Doritos, to buy Doritos? So this can be a very benign change in our society, or it can be something else. And who is making these decisions? These are the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're going on about these types of things. And the pandemic is just this COVID pandemic that we've all been living through and that we've all had to adjust to. And it has had some positive outcomes and some negative outcomes, of course, but it's not the last. It's a novel virus, but it's not the last one to affect us. There will be other ones in the future. And what have we learned from this one that we will do better next time? Next time, a novel virus, one we've never encountered. We don't have any vaccines stored that we can immediately use. We're going to have to develop novel solutions for the next one, which is inevitably going to occur. So are we going to be focused on how to develop that? And then after we develop it, who has access to it? How have we learned to distribute it better? And who has access to it? Is it going to be the white male landowner only? Or is it going to be available to all? And if our goal is to make it available to all, we're going to have to change our mindset. We're going to have to think beyond the borders of a particular country. We're going to have to think about the planet Earth and the Homo sapiens that live on the planet Earth. And if we take that approach, then we have to cooperate. This means governmental cooperation, cooperation between many different countries. The way we think of ourselves as artificially, we think of ourselves as countries, citizens of a country. Now, we're citizens of a planet Earth, and we have to change our mindset, which will change our hearts. And we'll think about these types of things differently in a systematic way, excuse me. And we will think about a system of systems, as David has taught me to say. And how are we going to respond in the future to what's inevitably going to occur better than we have in the past? And these are the questions. And who are making the decisions? We have to start to wonder about that too. Because are they just, do they have halos over their head or not? Maybe they don't. So maybe what we're doing takes a lot of effort in a lot of different directions. It starts with yourself. And you change yourself. Your way of thinking is not about how much can I consume. And I say, don't ask what the planet can do for you. Ask you what you can do for the planet. And then influence those in your sphere of influence. Change your community. And then let those people influence them, other people in their sphere of influence. Now, all of a sudden, you have a groundswell and it bubbles up. And you vote for the people that have like mindsets, that are vocalizing what you believe, what you internally believe. And then they get more decision-making power to set policy that is more in line with what we need. It's not what we want and what we desire, which is power and control and all that kind of stuff. It's what we need. Drinkable water, abundant food, and we need healthy air to breathe. So let's make our engineers who are so good at making things, let them make a world we can live in. And that, I think, if we have our clearly articulated goals, the proper goals into how does our species survive, the climate changes that we're facing, the pandemics that we're going to face in the future, not just the one that we've experienced, but the ones that are going to happen. How do we do it as a species? How do we adapt and survive? Because it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of those that fit best. And our species is not fitting in too well. We're tearing down the forest that we need. We're taking a lot of land and using it to raise animals in the mistaken belief that we need them to eat. We're making a lot of wrong decisions, suboptimal decisions, because we haven't got our priorities straight. So when we change our minds, we change our hearts. Or you can change your heart to change other minds. Either way, it works. But what are our goals? Let's get clear articulation of what are our goals. How do we want our planet to look in the year 2050, 2030 even? Because this pace of change is accelerating. It's not just going in a gradual upturn. It's accelerating. The technologies are marvelous to me. They're mind-blowing in some cases. But are they being used for what we need? Or are they being used for what some want? So these are the questions we should be asking ourselves. Change how you look at things. Influence others. And then we have some hope. And I'm optimistic by nature. I think that whatever problem we have, there's a solution trailing behind it, and we have the ability to find that solution. Thank you, Sharif, for a wonderful show.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some points that I find quite interesting. I was in agreement with when Mr. Ntumba mentioned an interdisciplinary approach to our challenges. I agree with that. I think the architect Vitruvius himself said that architects should be like interdisciplinary polymaths, and I think engineers should be as well. And Mr. James Eade, about 10 minutes ago, mentioned specialization, and we are in an age of specialization, and gone from polymaths like Da Vinci to quite deep understanding of quite isolated areas of knowledge now. So maybe we have to go back to a kind of polymathic intelligence to probably face some of the challenges we have with AI and things that affect the whole planet. So maybe devices like what Elon Musk is developing with the Neuralink might help facilitate kind of super polymathy, because I think it was Ray Bradbury, the author. I think he said specializations for insects. I think it was Ray Bradbury. But yeah, and that ties in with what Mr. David Smith was talking about, silo culture, and I think that's excessive over allocation. Well, I'm quite skeptical of siloing and specialization. And I personally found working in a silo culture quite soul destroying. But so yeah, we just need to kind of evolve to a post-scarcity society. I also think we should evolve into a post-specialization society as well. And Mr. Kumar made a good point about technological growth. So I think belligerent technological growth that's uncontrolled, with disregard for consequences, short term and long term, maybe require some kind of moral enhancement, which is an idea in transhumanism, which is what it, as the name says. So maybe we could enhance our moral compass with biotech, like genetic engineering, neurotechnology, or allocate ethical consequence allocations to an artificial intelligence, perhaps. Both are risky, but risk is the name of the game, I suppose. But yeah, I think we should have like a bioethics inspired focus towards the future of our society, so we can address all these concerns without accidentally disregarding others.
Thank you. Thank you. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. Before that, I just want to share this is our 325 episode. So all of the topic on sustainability, different futuristic thoughts, leaderships, everything as much as possible we try to cover. And people from 100 different countries, last 1 year, they're joining in World Talent Economy Forums, and they share their thoughts, their views, and everything. We try to make it very effective based on the demand of the Asia Pacific, and definitely we want to grow together. We want to make this think tank more effective with the contributions of our professors from different countries and different corporate personals, even the politicians, those who join in World Talent Economy Forum. So thank you everyone, thank you our audience. I request everyone share our content as much as possible with your community, with your governments, with your corporations, with your academia. It will be very, very effective, and hopefully it will be helpful for your developments. So I want to start from Professor David, then Professor Donald, then Professor Adrian, then Mr. James, then Mr. Adam, and finally Mr. Kumar. Professor David.
Great show again. I love the knowledge I get from listening to the various perspectives. As James referred to earlier, this really is another example of a system of systems problem. And it's one where all the stakeholders need to come together to make the humanity a major topic as we look at the engineering science going forward in all the different areas, from how we work with the different genders, how we work with the different countries, the different industries, and how that has to be done to be effective. My real concluding remark on this is, I'm going to be very short, is we need to use the wisdom of crowds. We need to use the wisdom across the barriers between the different industries, the different silos, the different institutions, the different governments, to come up with solutions that help advance humanity. And to me, I cannot go much further than that. I believe that collaboration is the key to us solving complex issues like this. Let me actually put it another way. Engineering for humanity is not a complex issue. It's a grand challenge. And we should approach it as a grand challenge. And it takes the wisdom of all of us to tackle a grand challenge. And Sri, thank you for having me be part of this. And you're muted.
Professor Donald.
You're muted now.
Part of what I've been saying is the importance of being a polymath, because I think that people aren't up on what we've been learning in social sciences. I really recommend a book called Surfing Uncertainty by Andy Clark. And he's a philosopher of science who's talking about incorporating our new knowledge of neuroscience into philosophy in general. It's a fantastic book. I mean, it's just, it'll change your view. And there's actually some very good suggestions for artificial intelligence. I mean, he knows the stuff cold. He's talking about gradient descent and all the various kinds of things, algorithms we use in artificial intelligence. He knows what he's talking about. But I think, as I keep saying, I think we're very, very far. Douglas Hofstadter said about 500 years from really being able to understand and use human language the way that humans do. Douglas Hofstadter wrote this fabulous book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach, and is a very, very highly regarded computer scientist. I work in the field of information systems, which is the relationship between humans and computers, the kinds of systems that develop as the two interact, and that's social science too. I want to give an example of a way that this is being used that's kind of not so great. I've just been reading a book that came out yesterday, halfway through. It's called An Ugly Truth. And it's basically a New York Times reporter got together emails, discussions, and got people to anonymously talk about what goes on inside of Facebook. And any idea that you have that Zuckerberg is a philanthropist and a nice guy is wrong. Their only goal was to make money. And when Trump, they had this thing that they were going to say, it was newsworthy when famous politicians talked, so they weren't going to block them. They came up with that on the fly. They said, what excuse are we going to use so we can keep Trump on? Because lots of people argue with him, and so we get tons of content, which is valuable because we can charge more for advertising. And then they made that up on the spot. It had nothing, it had never been a rule inside of their thing. And if you think Zuckerberg is bad, look at Sheryl Sandberg. I mean, all of her pretend philanthropy is done by their marketing department so that they can give some appearance of not being absolute ruthless. And those algorithms identify you and get you and feed you the best thing to persuade you and to make you. I think it was Jim that mentioned the idea of wanting Cheetos or something like that. Well, that's what they do. I mean, they peg you by what you look at, what things you click on, and they identify what things they think are going to persuade you the most, or you're going to be most interested in, so that they can persuade you to go a certain direction. And I think that that's an example of something that has to be dealt with at a higher level. And when we get back into the thing of women, you have to really try and visualize what I'm saying about roles. Because if you apply for a job right now at one of the computer companies, they ask you a series of questions to identify you as a certain role. So they're not hiring a person; they're hiring somebody who knows the swing class of Java, and that's what they're going to hire. And if you don't know this, if you're not an expert at the swing class of Java, they're not going to hire you. So they create these silos, and if you want to work, you're pretty much stuck going into one of them because that's just the way it is. We've developed this over a period of years. But you go to a country like Finland, the happiest country in the world, all of their top officials are women, and they do things like in the United States, we're talking about maternity leave. But what they do is they give a lot, a year or something like that, of leave that can be shared between the woman and the man. So if the man wants to take a month off and the woman wants to work instead, they can do that. So they share. The man gets a month just that done. So they give both the women and the men a month, but they also give them a year that they can share between them. And that, of course, allows women to be a lot more flexible. And as a consequence, the group that I'm in the Oasis group in the University of Oulu, I think it's the majority women, or at least half women. And that has to happen at a top-down level. So I think that we've really got to keep our eye on the politics of where we are and try and work on changing the role structure of our society. And what I'm going back to what I was saying, where it applies to technology, is we're able to start measuring these things. So we're not going to do it right the first time. We need to iterate, but the only way that we can iterate successfully is to measure what we've done. And our measurements right now are money, how much money you make in the United States. But in Finland, they've got other measures of happiness and measures of well-being, and that's why they're the happiest country in the world, because they actually work towards doing that and work towards creating a society where that's possible, and they work towards measuring what they're doing in ways that actually benefit people. Okay, that's what I'm going to conclude with.
Thank you. Professor Adrian, what's your concluding remarks today?
Yes, well, thank you again for the good show, great show, and all the great speakers. We talked a lot about the equal rights and women's issues, and I just want to go back to the engineering aspect, since I'm an engineer, and just congratulate all the amazing work done by many bioengineers to make the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. Maybe there's more coming along, I think, with other companies. But those engineers literally save the lives of millions of people. And when more and more people get vaccine, we're going to save the lives of millions of people more from the coronavirus. So I think that's going to be a great thing, a great achievement of engineers. When we look back in human history, that's going to be a great achievement of humans engineering work. So congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. James Eade. Mr. James Eade. Okay.
Sorry, I had to change my background. I want to talk about walls, the walls between us. One of the most proud moments as a United States citizen was when the president said to tear down the walls between the East and the West. And one of the most shameful moments as a citizen of the United States was when a president wanted to build a wall between the North and the South. So, stop building walls between us. Tear down the walls and build bridges instead. And let's thank the translators for what they do, because you don't all speak the same language, and the translators help us. And let's thank the protocol converters in this, because the job that I got compensated the most for was They called it something else, but it was really protocol conversion. It was my ability to understand the technical people and to translate their language, the way they spoke, to management speak, so that the upper management could understand what the technicians wanted to do. And the technicians could understand what the upper management wanted to do. So we were able to talk, they were able to talk to each other through me, through a protocol converter. And so that's what we need, protocol conversion. To translate what we have done in the past to what we need in the future. That's another protocol conversion that we have to go through. And we have to do that in a different way than we've done before. The past definitely forms us, but it can inform us if we allow it to. We can see what we've done wrong. We can see what no longer serves. Discard what no longer serves and be open to the change of what serves us now and what might serve us in the future. And it's got to be thought, there's got to be, the perspective has to be of mankind, of Homo sapiens on the planet Earth. So I remind people to ask not what the planet can do for you, but what you can do for the planet. If you think you can't have a problem for you, you're just another person on the wall. Everybody can have a role and seize the opportunity to have whatever your role is, perform it, act. And if you don't have the skill sets, get the skill sets you need. Identify what it is that you are good at, follow your passion. And these things will enable you to make a difference in society. And all of us, small beings that we are, we can only make an incremental change. But if 1 million people make an incremental change, that becomes a big change. And if 1 million people do it, then all of a sudden society has changed. So I am optimistic that society is not stuck in the present, and it will continue to evolve. And I do not think that Homo sapiens are the ultimate end of evolution. Evolution didn't go, oh, I created humans, I'm done. No, I think we're going to continue to grow and change and adapt. And it's going to be the survival of the one that fits best in the planet that we're living. And if we poison it, fewer and fewer of us will survive. And we are already seeing extinction level events. Things that once were thriving are no longer living. So it's not a silly question to ask. How are we going to invent the future, be a part of the future, a part of it, but we have to change our mindset. We have to change our global perspective and think of us as the one species. And the artificial boundaries that we have created, the borders that we have on maps and on globes and in atlases, those are artificial. The boundaries in nature are oceans, mountain ranges. Those are the true boundaries of nature. So respect them, but do not create artificial ones that no longer serve. So we're in this together. And that's my concluding remark. Sharif, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you, Sharif, and I've got some notes written down I was writing as the meeting went on, so if anybody would like me to send them a copy, I'll happily email them to you. Lots of novel ideas I've not heard before, like protocol conversion. That's interesting. The wisdom of crowds kind of framed in a positive way rather than when other people talk about crowd intelligence in a negative way. So, yeah, it's lots of interesting novel ideas. I really enjoyed the discussion, and yeah, like I said, I'll be happy to email meeting notes to anyone who want to refresh what we're talking about. And thank you again, Sharif, for inviting me, and thank you everyone for making me feel welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Kumar. Kumar, what's your concluding remarks?
Thank you. I mean, can't agree more with all this panelists. I mean, great speakers, and I learned so much today from everybody. I mean, it's gave us good hope and bright future for us. So, on a closing note, I mean, I would say, I mean, as Mr. Donald said, all the Scandinavian countries, they were very happy because they share everything with each other. When you want to do some good things and when you want happiness, everybody should have equally. So for that, I mean, I believe in that. So if you give when you have problem statement, you also should have a proper tool to solve it. If they don't have the knowledge in the tool, they cannot solve it. So from my point of view, it has to be open source. Everybody can solve the global problem, like from water or waste or anything. It has to be open source so that everybody have the knowledge and the tool to solve the issue, and so that they can do the engineering inside as well as outside. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions, and bye bye and take care.
Bye everyone.